And on the back page, we've got the words on the very back cover, and there was much toing and froing about could we keep these words and still have it in an Australian government report. And we've got feared, loathed, discriminated against, rejected, excluded, and we deliberately told it as it was in that report, because that report then led to the next step. This is all since late 2007, and this was late 2009 when the Productivity Commission was given the reference to work on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The National Disability Insurance Scheme gained currency because of Shutout, because Shutout said that something needed to be done, and we were lucky enough to have an idea for reform that had emerged from the 2020 summit and had then progressed in other forums too. And so the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the fact that the government was prepared to refer that to the Productivity Commission is a really big step in the story. You know, really big step. Here's the Productivity Commission, the organisation in Australia that's regarded as very conservative, that's highly economic. It's a group of economists who analyse cost, benefit and value for the government. So you know, it was sent to a very serious body that's not known for its progressive thinking. Frankly, I don't want to say it's been unprogressive, but progressiveness wasn't part of what they're on the earth for. They're on the earth for very rationalist economic analysis. That's what they're there for. And that was a big step. Some of us were a bit concerned. You know, we probably would have preferred a softer group to have received the reference to look at the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But as it happens, it's turned out well. So at the same time as that reference went to the Productivity Commission, we knew that the splits that I referred to earlier between carers, the carers movement, and disability rights movement, and with service sector. The service sector had been the common enemy for everybody. Everybody thought, well, the service sector, they're running group homes, you know, they're doing all the things that are sort of not helping, so they were the common enemy. And we knew from Shorten, I think it was Shorten that gave us this insight, that the splits couldn't continue. That if we were going to get this National Disability Insurance Scheme up, we had to come together. And so an alliance was built, and has been built, called the National Disability and Carers Alliance. And it's a very important part of the jigsaw, because it consists of Carers Australia and all the carers organisations. It consists of the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, AFDO, and all the disability rights organisations. And it consists of the National Disability Services Organisation and all their affiliates. So it's the first time in Australia that the three streams of disability have come together into an organisation. And I think it is the most important step, really, in the short term for what we're trying to achieve now, but also in the long term. And I personally, because I took a hand in developing this alliance, and I found it a very moving endeavour, because, you know, it was a healing in a way. Like, I don't want to get too sort of emotional about it, but it was a healing of splits that were completely unnecessary, and that had to be put aside. So it's not a cynical bringing together of different streams, it's actually a genuine bringing together, listening to each other, and we all recognised that the topic that we're all addressing is disability. That disability is the reason we're together. So the rights are about disability rights. That's at the core of this alliance. Because if you have disability rights, then everybody else gets rights too. Carers' rights come from disability rights. That's how we understand it. And so that alliance is not just there for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, it's there for every issue we need to work on together. And of course that includes building codes and more housing stock in the private market, rental market. It includes education, which will be thornier because there are different views there, but still to have this forum, this alliance to work out the common ground is really important. But the main game in the short run is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And why do I say that? Because where we're at now, as you would all know, is that the Productivity Commission has put out its first report, its interim report, in February, on February the 27th. And they're in the process of still accepting submissions, even though they say they're not, and putting out the next report on July the 31st, which will be the final report. It's chaired by Patricia Scott, who's the Commissioner, and it has Associate Commissioner John Walsh, who's a person with profound disabilities, who's also an actuarial, a top partner for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And John was working on the National Disability Insurance Scheme on the numbers crunching leading up to the Productivity Commission being announced as having this reference. And why are we putting so much hope in their recommendations to date? Because it's a completely different model. And I want to come back to the Leone issue of Leone coming to South Australia and test it. You know, let's test the Productivity Commission recommendations. So they're recommending that all of the state provision for disability would be coming through a national model where there'd be across Australia uniformity. So what you get in South Australia, you'd have similar standards in Western Australia or anywhere in Australia, which I think is a very good thing because that means there's portability. The second thing they're recommending is most important, and that's if people choose, then you have self-managed funding where you decide or your agent decides what you want to do with your funding package. What do you want to do? Do you want to go to the footy? Do you want to spend it on one thing or another? So that self-managed funding, where we've got trials, smallish trials in Victoria, is a model that's very common in the UK, where there's been a number of approaches to this, but they've now got a very good model that's working very well. So we've been able to learn from them for the Productivity Commission's recommendations. And that would mean, in part, that Leone might have made her own decision. The third area that's very important to Leone is that aids and appliances and equipment would be provided to serve your needs. So the terrible stories we heard in the shutout report of people's wheelchairs breaking down and they couldn't get to work. You know, they'd have to wait. They're on waiting lists for years to get new equipment if it's major equipment. It was good for me to hear on the DVD today that much of the communications equipment is available. One would hope it would be, because it should be. But I still believe from the stories I've heard that there's new equipment. And the Productivity Commission's recommendations are unambivalent. That the new and best equipment that gets people back into life and into communication for whatever they need to communicate about is essential. And why they see it this way is because it is an insurance model. And I reckon that word's very confusing. And some of us wanted to drop the word but keep the model. But we didn't succeed in achieving that, because people think insurance means you pay something privately to buy insurance, and that's not what this scheme means. It means that the insurance would be paid for by the government. So it's what's called a social insurance scheme that's being recommended, not a private insurance scheme. And that really the beauty, the aids and appliances story and the adequacy in the packages is because it helps the insurance model to get people what they need up front. That if you get what you need to live a good life, that means that you can get the maximum education, the maximum participation, then it's less of a drain on the fund. And that's why insurance is a really good incentive. Currently, we've got what I call a perverse incentive, that if you've got a highly rationed system, then you give people the barest minimum. So you don't give them enough to get out and about and live a life that gets them really participating. You give them the barest minimum, and then you week out the funds, you know. But an insurance model is the opposite. It's giving people up front early intervention, as long as it's proven, as long as there's evidence-based for it, equipment, aids and appliances, education to the absolute maximum, everything people need to be able to live the best life they can. That's the incentive in a social insurance model. The Productivity Commission recommended that the total budget in Australia for disability be doubled. So that people, the reason I didn't put that first in my list of what they're recommended is because if you doubled the money with the current provision, my view is it would still be disaster, that it would still not help, that we've got to transform the current models and you double the money. You know, that doubling the money isn't enough. So the doubling of the money is, however, incredibly valuable. And to have the Productivity Commission do the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis in Australia, to give us that figure of doubling the money. Now, there are many challenges for us in achieving the reform, and I can go into more detail about the scheme. I really encourage you to read the summary document, if you haven't read it already, from the Commission, and definitely to read the final report when it comes out. But the challenges are they're timing challenges. So there's a campaign called Every Australian Counts. You should be signing up to the campaign. But the challenges are that the government has to respond to the Productivity Commission report by November the 25th. They've got a certain number of days where you have to respond to any Productivity Commission report. And we want the government to commit to the scheme. And we want that in this, you know, and we want that now on the 25th of November. Because if we don't get it then the campaign has to make this an election issue, and that is very hard. Now, so that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the campaign has currently barely reached people with disabilities, carers and service sector. It has not reached the business community. It has not reached the union movement. It has not reached every Australian. So every Australian doesn't count, and that's because the campaign is a very minimalist campaign with very small funds. And so, you know, it's hard.